Hello, welcome back. This is Jeff Byers. I'm your instructor for ANTI 150, and this is part one of texturing. So, in our last video, we went ahead and UV mapped our table, chairs, and other assets that we have on the table, and I think we even did the floor, and maybe even the walls. So, the walls will be extra credit. So if you leave those out, that's okay. But if you add those in and texture those, that will be extra credit, worth 10 extra credit points. So here we go in texturing. I think this is my favorite part nowadays. I used to be modeling. Texturing was my least favorite, but now that Substance Painter makes it really easy to paint on 3D objects, it's really awesome and a lot more fun. So let's get started. Okay, so what you need to do is watch my videos on the Substance Painter UI and get more familiar with the setup. And we'll start with File and New. And we have a template we need to set as ASM PBR Metallic Roughness, Starter Assets. We need to select our file. Okay. And I don't think I have my flash drive in, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and get my flash drive in, and then I'll go ahead and take it from there. So we'll click on Select and find our files. So it will be on my PC, on Table and Chairs. Double click on that. It should be in the Scenes folder, and you can see we have all my objects in here. We can only do one at a time, so I'm going to start with the table, and I'm going to show you how to do the table, and then the chair, and the rest is really up to you how you want to do that. So once I show you how to do one and then the chair, the table and the chair, then you should be able to do the rest of it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and go to Open. And we don't see anything yet. It's in the queue, so we're going to go Document Resolution. We're going to go to 4096. We could go to 2048. It's not a huge asset, but let's go ahead and do 4096. Normal map format, DirectX, everything else looks good. You will need to use UV tile workflow. That's the same thing as UDIM workflow. So use the UDIM tile, UV tile workflow, and then click on Convert UV tiles into individual texture sets. Okay, and we don't have anything to import, so let's go ahead and click OK. And there it is. There's our table. All right, so we have our tabletop now. What it's done is broken it up into texture sets, and this is our texture set list. So we've got 1001, and we can tell if I click that on and off, you can see that the tabletop turns on and off. That means that it is masked to that particular layer. And then we've got the legs. Okay, so if we wanted to add a different texture or material to the legs, we can, which is really nice. And each one, if I click on the tabletop, has a layer. Okay, this is our paints layer. Okay, right, and this is when we click on that, it has its own layer. The legs of the table has its own layers too as well. So they're all separated with layers. And we're not going to go deep into this. We're going to keep it very simple and then work our way into more challenging texture scenarios down through the modules. Okay, we're going to keep this really simple. All right. So we're going to start with the tabletop. Okay. And if you want to paint, you can paint on there and do all kinds of stuff, and it paints right on the object. So you can see there, and I can paint on the 2D laid out UVs too. So these are the UVs, okay? And I'm just moving around by clicking on the Alt key and the left mouse button. That's what, it's the same controls as Maya, which is really nice, okay? I can even paint on the bottom of this if I want to. I think that'll show up on the bottom too. Is that, yep. So I'm going to go Control Z back. There we go. Great. So that's your paint. We're not going to use painting. We're going to be using textures. So Substance Painter comes with some textures. It's not a lot. So we've got materials, and then we've got smart materials. Okay. All right. Now we can't really use smart materials until we bake a low poly onto this low poly and bake maps, because the smart materials uses curvature maps and depth maps to give us wear and tear. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of an example here real quick. So with the this selected, I am going to go to mode, let's see, and bake mesh maps. Okay. This takes us into the baking process. Now, normally I would have a high poly model. I would use a high poly model with a bunch of detail on it to add to the low poly. So I have my low poly here, and I would bake all the high poly detail onto the low poly. Okay, I've got some examples in Module 2, so check those out. Now we're not really doing, we did not create a high poly object for the table. We really didn't need to. So, and because this is your first week, I want to keep it as simple as possible, but I want to, you know, please look at the examples of why and how you would use high poly models, and we're going to get into that when we get into the food can. Okay, we're gonna have a high poly and a low poly in that module. So we're gonna have a couple projects before we get into baking maps. Okay. So output size, we want 4096, and dilation we'll keep it 32. We don't really have a high poly. If you had a high poly model of the table with all kinds of high detail, then you would click on this. It says high definition meshes. You would click on it and import your high poly mesh into that. But we don't, but we can bake a low poly, the low poly on top of itself. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to have a normal map, world space normal. I don't need an ID map. Okay. Ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness map sounds good to me. Okay. And that looks pretty good. We're going to put our max frontal distance to 0.5 and your max rear distance 2.5. There we go. And hit enter. And then we're going to go ahead. Everything else looks good. It says you can use the cage, but it's something we'd have to make in Maya and then import it in here. Right now, we have bake visualization off. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we got show for selected texture only. Kind of turns the gold color. Okay, all right. So bake selected textures. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So it's going through all the baking of the textures, and it should be done soon. I might cut this out in editing. There we go. Looks good. So we got all our textures done. I'll return to painting mode. So click on this area right here at the bottom. There we go. So we've got all the textures on the objects. Okay. All right, that looks good. And let's see what we have so far. Okay. So under layers, we've got our layers here, and we've got our texture set settings. And if you scroll down, you can see we have a thickness, position, curvature, ambient occlusion, world space normal, and normal map. Okay. So we should have that for the other one too as well, for the legs, and we do. Okay, that looks good. It doesn't look like anything happened, but it did. Okay. Now, if we ever want to use the smart materials, which are these guys right here, now what is the difference? Well, we've got just materials, okay, and we could go in here. Let's see, what map would we want to go in here with? Let's say we have, okay, let's say we'll put leather on top. Okay. So I can just drag and drop this. So let me get back into layers here. I can drag and drop the leather skin on here, okay, or I can apply it directly to the object. Here we go. It depends on the texture, and sometimes it takes a while for it to show up on the object. So just be patient. All right, so on here you can see that we don't really have any weathering anywhere on this object with that texture. But it's really cool that you can add that texture onto the table pretty easily. Okay. Now I picked a texture that has some cells in here to show us the size and scaling. Okay, so how do we deal with that, the size and scaling? Well, you want to click on the leather itself, the material that we put on there. Okay, and it's repeating right now. If we went to none, it would not repeat. So we want to make sure we repeat the pattern. There we go. Scale is tiling, and then tiling is how the material looks on the object. And leather and this size of a table, it would look more like this than it would the other way. Okay, so depending on your scale of your object, you're gonna have to scale your tiling up, which means it gets smaller. Okay, it repeats 8 times. Okay, and you can make it smaller so it repeats less, and you can get something like that. So you can also make it a little bit bigger here. We can also rotate it, the texture around. Okay, we can offset the texture, moving it around on top. Okay, let's turn that back to 0. Okay, and then we can offset it the other way. Okay, so we can offset U and V. Okay, so just simple stuff here. We're not going to go crazy with anything. We're not going to mess around with textures. Most of the materials do have leather color, or excuse me, they have color, and you can go in there and change it to any color that you want, that you please. That's the beauty of procedural textures. All of the Substance Painter materials are procedural. Basically what that means is that you should not see any seams anywhere in the texture, which is really cool. That means you can make it smaller or larger and not see seams. Okay, I'm not saying you won't see a repeat pattern, but you will not see seams in most of the textures. Okay, so all of these attributes can be changed. Now I'm going to spend a whole lot of time changing the attributes of this particular material because I really don't want to use it. Okay, so but that's where it is. That's where you can go in there and just kind of mess with these settings until you get what you want. Okay, all right. So with that said, we're going to add something that's more appropriate. Now they may or may not have anything. So like they may have like a wood looks like they have a wood plane. Now, we have stylized wood, which really won't work. So if I type in search in and just type in wood, okay, it'll just show the woods that are available. And if you hover over it, it will show you a larger view of it. Okay. Now you're more than welcome to use what comes with it, but it's limited, right? So I wanted to give you guys some woods that I have in my library and share those with you. So please download those in Module 2 and download those. Once you pause the video and download those, and I'll show you how to import them in. Okay, let's go ahead and delete the search, and that'll take you back to all the materials.